Hi, I'm Katherine Chiglinsky. I'm a reporter at Bloomberg News covering insurance, and I'm pleased to introduce Alan Colberg. He's the CEO and president of Assurant. I find this really interesting because as a company that can trace its roots back nearly 130 years, you've seen this sort of question about the future of insurance many a times. And you've been leading the recent sort of iteration of how Assurant is going to respond to this future of insurance, including by your acquisition of the warranty group and also your realignment in 2015 of the company. They changed it a bit to focus on the housing and lifestyle markets. And so I'd love to start with that point. So why back in 2015 did you take the company and say, hey, let's shift it away from this sort of employee benefits and health operations a bit and change it to housing and lifestyle?
Yeah, no, and Katherine, appreciate the chance to come chat with everyone today. Maybe I'll start with what is Assurant. And so for many years, we were owned by a Dutch insurance company, and there was no logic to the company. What we've really done is looked at where we were most successful, and where we've been very successful is when we embed in a large consumer company. So think Amazon or Google or Apple, and we effectively outsource a portion of the value chain around the consumer ownership of something. So we exited every standard lines business we were in. Anything that was distributed through independent agents or that was a commodity product, we got out of. So that you referenced 130 years ago, that was our health insurance company. We sold part of it and we put the rest into runoff. So we really focus now around major consumer purchases. So the consumer's buying a car, a house, they're renting something, they're buying a consumer electronic, and we do far more than insurance. So we're really trying to enable the ownership experience far beyond if you lose it or it's stolen.
Well, and you sort of cemented this bet quite a bit in 2017 when you agreed to buy the warranty group. Could you explain a bit your thinking behind that? Why this company, what sort of drew you to it?
So we played in the auto business for a long time. We were one of the leading players around vehicle service contracts, but we sold through TPAs. And so we looked at all the change coming in auto. So think about autonomous vehicles, subscription models, different ownership models, connected cars, electric vehicles. If you want to play in that evolution, you have to play directly with the people that are in the market, the OEMs, the dealers. And the warranty group was the market leader in every channel in the world. And so combining us, for example, we had 14 million service contracts as Assurant. We now have 48 million service contracts, and we're best positioned to adapt as the auto world changes.
Well, and I think this is a big point, right? I mean, the whole auto insurance market has been talking about, the future of autonomous cars and driverless vehicles and how that might change the strategy. Can you talk a bit about how you see that as a trend evolving, and sort of the timeline? Do you think it's going to happen a little faster than we think, or maybe a little further out?
Yeah, I think autonomous is real. I think it'll be slow. And then once it's not slow, it'll be really fast. So it's one of those where it's going to take a long time and then it's going to inflect. And really what will inflect it is 5G. When the infrastructure is in place to really enable autonomous, we'll have an overnight, what happened type thing. I give thanks all the time we don't write standard lines insurance. Or if we do, it's in a really funky distribution model. If I was a standard lines insurance company, I would be panicked because the evolution of this shifts away from individual consumers to more ownership by corporations. That actually plays right to our sweet spot. We don't do anything direct to consumer. We do everything embedded in a consumer company. So we feel well positioned, recognizing the world's going to change so much that if we don't continue to adapt our products and services, it doesn't matter where we play today.
Mm-hmm. Well, that makes a ton of sense. And I was wondering, could you explain a bit how you work with these autonomous vehicle manufacturers? Like, can you describe the relationship of, what's it like to be kind of a partner and an insurer that kind of partners up with these manufacturers?
Yeah, so it's very early. So what we're doing today may or may not work, right? So one of the things we do is experiment all the time. But if you think about, let's take an OEM. So their choice is I can make a car and sell it to a dealer and I get a one-time profit, or I can make that car, I can operate it for a while, and then I can sell it. And I can maybe sell it outside of my dealer network and make a higher profit. So what we're doing in the experiments are we're enabling the fleet management. So we're doing the maintenance, we're doing the coordination and the scheduling. And then when they go to sell it, it goes to one of our service contracts. And so we're just basically trying to enable that entire chain for an OEM. And autonomous is the thing that will probably push them, more to take control of ownership as opposed to traditional vehicles. They're all trying it now, but autonomous gives them a different way to go around their dealers, which is what OEMs would like to do.
Yeah. And it almost sounds like you're becoming less of an actual insurer in that way. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about how much of the business sort of is now doing some of these service things versus actually sort of the insurance aspect of it.
So if you look at Assurant today, about half of our income comes from non-insurance already. And I'll give you an example. The place we're most advanced is the mobile business. So we're the second largest player globally around cell phone ownership. And we started doing handset protection. So you lose it, you break, you lose it or it's stolen. We then grew into repair and logistics. We have about 3,000 manufacturer employees today that repair and refurbish cell phones. We're the largest seller on Amazon and eBay of used cell phones. We then went into diagnostic technology. So we have a thing called Pocket Geek that sits on 20 million plus cell phones today that enables the user experience. And then more recently, our whole vision is that really the way to think about it is consumers hate insurance. They don't want to buy it, and when they use it, they're unhappy because something bad happened, and maybe they're happy if their claim got paid quickly. We're trying to make it, whether you ever need the insurance elements, it's a great experience. So our most recent offering that we've rolled out the last couple of years with people like Comcast, T-Mobile, is premium tech support. So we're doing the troubleshooting when you're trying to get your Nest thermostat, your Google, Wi-Fi, your Ring camera, your Comcast router. You can't get any of it to work. We're doing the troubleshooting. And that's another business that really enables the consumer to feel great about the fact they bought our product. So we're trying to do that in all of our major verticals, mobile, auto, and rental.
Could you talk a bit about the talent equation? Because it sounds like, obviously, this is not sort of the day-to-day job of a traditional insurance underwriter or someone who's traditionally been hired by this field. Could you talk about how it's been to search for the talent that you need to make sure that you guys are kind of entering these new businesses successfully?
So the unique thing about Assurant is we don't underwrite most of our products. So in mobile, for example, we'll take anyone who wants to buy the product, right? And same with our rental business, same with even our standard lines homeowners sold through a really unique distribution. We take everybody. So our real talent is around the customer experience. So for example, what we've had to do in the connected home. So if you go to Duluth, Georgia, we have a connected home center. We've built out rooms with every possible connected device. We hire the 21-year-old who just graduated from college there. And they go on the phone or on the chat, and they do the troubleshooting when the consumer can't get it to work. And if they can't figure it out, they go into our little connected home, and they play around. They reconfigure exactly what the consumer has, and they figure out why it's not working. So we have to hire smart, young kids. Insurance is irrelevant in that world, right? This is all about how do you manage the consumer experience? How do you troubleshoot a very complex situation? So our talent's always been quite different because we don't underwrite even the insurance products we have.
Really interesting, right? I mean, most traditional insurers would kind of balk at that idea of like you're not always, underwriting a bit. Could you maybe explain why? What's the benefit of sort of just taking everyone that you can?
Well, so we're not big, right? We're $9 billion of revenue, which I know is big compared to a lot of the early stage companies, but in the insurance world, we're small. So it's a scale business, it's a commodity business. If you want to play that game, you have to be big. So we've always had to adapt. And I'll give you an example. The only place that we play the standard line game, for example, in the NFIP program, the U.S. government flood program, we're the second largest player, but we seed all the rest of the U.S. government. So again, we don't have to underwrite it. We just take every comer, we get a fee for writing it, and we get a fee when we administer the claim. So it's pure fee income business for us. It's a bit of a hedge for hurricane volatility.
That makes sense. One interesting aspect of Assurant is your partnerships with car subscription services. I know you guys partner with Fair, which is actually presenting later today.
I saw that on the agenda.
Yeah. I was wondering, could you talk about what's the strategy between these partnerships, and what sort of benefit is there to be underwriting the policies on this app, which you can turn on and turn off?
So the way we've thought about it is historically consumers own something, and all of our business was around the consumer owning something. We've really pushed hard the last decade into rental. So our theory is we don't care whether the consumer owns it or somebody else owns it and the consumer just rents it. So we push very hard into the sharing economy. And again, not knowing exactly where it's going to go. But for example, I think we're the leader now in insurance around delivery of food. So Grubhub, Seamless, DoorDash, anyone who's doing that last mile delivery. By the way, that links to autonomous, right? Because ultimately that's going to be autonomous, not humans. And similarly, with people like Fair and others, different ownership models, we want to embed. So one of the things we think about is we have to go wherever the consumer wants to go. We cannot look at a distribution and say we're only going to serve that distribution. So we've been very aggressive in our growth investing team in building partnerships with all the new emerging places consumers might go to get things. And that's how those partnerships. I don't know what will happen, but we feel we're well positioned whatever happens with it.
That makes sense. Well, you also, on the other side, you sort of have a partnership with Vacasa, which is like a vacation rental service. And I was wondering if you could talk about, is the goal sort of, partner with as many companies as you can? I mean, how do you sort of evaluate which ones you sort of see as the future or ones that you want to get in with and make sure that you're a part of?
So first, let me comment on Vacasa. I love Vacasa because it's a great example of how fast the world's changing. So Airbnb, Vacasa's strategy is to disrupt Airbnb, right? So you're a 5 or 6 year old company, you already have people trying to disrupt you. So what our growth investing team does is we basically spend all of our time looking at deals that are being funded by venture capitalists in the value chains we play in only. And our team has looked at 3,000 plus deals in the last 5 years. And we've ended up investing in about 20. And so where do we ultimately invest? We invest in new distribution models. We'll never own them fully, but we want to understand how is that distribution going to work, and could we become the preferred onboard partner for that distribution? We invest in capability that could be disruptive. So for example, the Pocket Geek technology, which sits on our cell phone, we actually developed that through an investment company where we owned a small stake. And then when we were able to scale it, we bought the company. And the last thing we do is we invest in people that could disrupt our businesses. So we've invested in pure play digital distribution companies to understand how they're going to disrupt our business. Because my view is, shame on us if we let anybody disrupt us. We have scale, we have infrastructure, we have capability, we have relationships. It's only if we think we're not going to get disrupted and we sit there and behave that way. So we really look at those three things. The other thing we do importantly, every time we have a strategy meeting of any of our businesses, that growth investing team has a seat at the table to challenge the team on what's happening in the market. Because if you're inside, you're operating, you're trying to hit your P&L, it's all about the short term. And so we also try to bring all those insights back in to challenge our business operators.
That makes a ton of sense. I'd love to dig in more to this corporate VC arm, because obviously it sounds like it's a big part of your puzzle. And how do you measure success with it? What do you see as sort of its end goals, and what you'll say is, a good job done by the team?
So when we set it up, 5+ years ago, we actually did this kind of hybrid of, it's not just financial return, it has to be strategic return. So the way we get that is, number one, we only look in the value chains we play. There's one exception to that. We invested in a pure AI company called Precision Lender. And we did that because this is a few years ago. We knew AI would disrupt every part of our operations. And by being in that company, being an observer on the board, we got insight into AI that's allowed us to build relationships and really drive AI into the company. But normally what we're trying to do is strategic value first. So if it's a pure financial investment, not something we do. It has to have some logic. We're going to learn something. We could see we might want to own this company. We could add a lot of value to it. And at the end of the day, we've taken about $100 million of our capital fund and said that's what we're going to put into VC. And then as these deals monetize, we've started to sell some of the ones that are not long-term strategic for us. We've made enough money, we're going to replenish that $100 million several times over.
That makes sense. Do you see this as being a group that you're going to keep around for the next 10, 20 years? Is it something that you're just sort of exploring how it impacts Assurant fully? And
I can't see that group not being part of the company. If you look at disruption, it's not like it's going to get less. It's going to get more. Right, so it's very important. If anything, we'll continue to build out that capability and team over time.
That makes a ton of sense. So one of your big businesses has been the rental business, renters insurance. And I know obviously that's that comes up against one of the big insurtechs, Lemonade. Could you talk a bit about the competitive landscape for this business? I mean, how do you make sure that you can compete with sort of the new entrants like Lemonade trying to grab a hold of this market?
Yeah, and it's true of every business, right? Every single thing we do has a digital pure play, which is what Lemonade is. So what we did, our strategy was really to say, okay, if somebody wants a digital straight through, we can do that. So we built that exactly what Lemonade does. We've also made it omni-channel. So if you as a consumer want to start digital, then talk to somebody or chat with somebody, then come back to digital, we've made it relatively seamless. So you as a consumer can journey through our path any way you want. And this is how we compete against them, right? At the end of the day, we should be able to match anything they're doing in digital. We can differentiate by giving consumers more choice, and we have scale they don't have. So we lower cost at the end of the day.
That makes sense. You talk a lot about this sort of divide between renting and owning in the market. Could you talk about how you see that trend evolving over the next couple of years? I mean, is it a trend that's going to totally, shift from complete ownership to renting totally, or is it more gradual? I mean, how do you see kind of the change?
Well, I think you'll always have both models. We've always had both. The last decade has seen, really a shift toward more renting of everything. I think what we've said is we're not smart enough to know which way that goes long term. So we want to play on ownership, we want to play on rental. And for us, actually, rental fits perfectly with our model because if somebody's going to rent something, there is a large company that's providing it, or a startup who will grow up to be a large company providing it. So our business is embedding in those companies. And so for us, we just need to be going, if consumers want to rent, we need to serve that. Consumers want to own, we need to partner with the companies that are going to provide the sale of it.
Of course. Could you talk about, I mean, obviously you have a lot of thoughts on whether it's autonomous vehicles reshaping the market, the renters strategy. Could you talk about how all this influences your M&A strategy? How you look at the companies that you want to acquire, like the warranty group, how does it factor in?
So we have 3 growth value chains, which is where we're putting the majority of our investment, the majority of our capital. So one is mobile, basically consumer electronics. The second is auto, and the third is rental. So really, we're only looking for reasonably sized acquisitions in those 3 channels. We have other businesses, and we might do a tuck-in, a pure economic consolidation play in those channels. But in the 3 main channels, we're looking at the entire consumer ownership. From the day the consumer first acquires it or rents it to the end of the day. And then we look at where in the value chain can we bundle things together, right? So we're not trying to sell service A and service B that aren't related. We're trying to find something that logically for the consumer or logically for our partner makes economic sense. So we have a separate team from our growth investing team that just goes out and looks at those value chains. And we've identified the 20 companies we think we ought to own in the fullness of the next few years in those 3 value chains. And then I've built a relationship with their CEO directly. And so we've just, again, these are all low probability, long-term courtships. And so we approach it that way.
That's cool.
So the warranty group, for example, we had first talked to in 2007.
Okay.
And we bought it more than a decade later.
Could you describe to us, I know you said there's about 20 companies, right, that you sort of have a view that you might like to own it one day. What part of the markets are they in? Like what, is it leaning towards sort of one area over another?
Well, they're in those 3 value chains. And they generally have nothing to do with insurance. They're generally, they're players in pieces of the value chain that we play in, where maybe we're not the biggest player in that piece and they bring us a lot more scale. Or they bring something we can embed in our product that today we are renting from somebody else. So we're embedding somebody else's product and maybe we're better off to own it. So that's how we think about it. But it's only in those 3 value chains, mobile, auto, and rental.
I find it particularly interesting. I feel like as Assurant, you sort of straddle 2 worlds, right? You guys are a traditional insurance company. I mean, you've played in this market for a long time, but you're also dealing with a lot of the new trends, I would say, arguably in kind of a faster way than maybe some other insurers are. Could you talk about, are there things that your insurance competitors, maybe the traditional ones, are saying or doing in regards to the change that they're seeing that you think is wrong, that you think is different, you sort of take a different tact on with sort of your future view?
Well, I think the challenge for traditional insurance is they're beholden to their distribution completely. So if you have a captive agent force, I meet with a lot of my peers and they can't do something because they're worried about how their agents are going to react. And my advice would be, ultimately, you can't care about that because the agents may be gone over time. So what I look at is, we have a lot of discussion internally. We cannot ever have channel conflict discussions. We have to play in every channel the consumer wants to go to, in any route to market the consumer wants to go to it. And so I think that's the biggest challenge for traditional insurers. And then risk tolerance, the things we're doing, we've had to redo our whole kind of risk process with our board to get them comfortable with. We're doing, we repaired 9 million cell phones last year. That's an inventory management business, completely different skill set. Sure. You almost have to retool your board and get your board comfortable with doing things that have nothing to do with insurance.
Yeah. The channel conflict is interesting, right? Because every insurer sort of talks about, they don't want to offend the agents. Can you talk about a bit on how you view, like, is it sort of a thing where we might not see insurance agents at all in the future, or do you think there's still a role to be played? Maybe it's different.
As long as the world is where insurance is sold, not bought, agents have some role. And so I would, it's like the banking world. We were going to have no checks 30 years ago, and we're gradually approaching no checks today. It'll probably be something like that, because most insurance is actually pushed on people right through the agents. We're trying to flip it where what people are buying is not insurance from us. They're buying ownership improvement. So whether that's the service contract, the premium tech support, the traditional loss theft, we're trying to get it to be something that's bundled in. And we see that particularly in our service contract business. Historically, we sold through retailers who got commission and they pushed it. In digital, it's completely flipped over the last decade to there's really little to no commission to the intermediary. It's all about how do you present it in a digital format that works for the consumer.
That makes a ton of sense. I'm particularly interested in the timeline you have. I mean, you mentioned you started talking to the warranty group back in 2007. That deal didn't happen until a decade later. So could you talk about how you view the changes in the industry going forward? I mean, what in sort of your strategy planning sessions, what are you what's on the horizon that maybe people think is 10 years out is kind of a further out than, but that you're getting ready for?
So here's how we think about the world, and I'm going to give you a stat which is not a stat that's a happy stat, which is over 50% of Americans don't have $500 available to them. And that is our consumer. Because everything we're doing is enabling people, when something happens and it doesn't work, they can actually get it dealt with without going to their friends and family, without going to a pawn shop. So we play in the market of the low to middle income consumer who can't afford not to have this thing they bought work. So what we look at, we do a lot of work on macro trends around, okay, what are things people are going to buy in the future that are expensive that they cannot afford to fail? Or they put out the money. We did a study last year. We go to CES every year, the mobile event show in Las Vegas. We did a big study on the connected consumer. About 80% of people who bought a connected device last year felt like they couldn't get full value out of it because they didn't really know how to make it work or how to leverage the capabilities. And that's expensive for most people. So we're trying to understand how do we help them. They bought a Nest thermostat. How do we teach them to really get full value out of it? So we think about it that way. Just here's our consumer. The good news, bad news is our consumer is a growth sector of the market, and there are always going to be things that they're going to want to buy or own or rent that are expensive. And how do we help them get value out of that purchase or rental?
That makes a ton of sense. And maybe talking about the future of insurance. Do you believe that insurance will remain a part of your business model years down the line? Will there still be a part that is sort of the pure, insurance policy aspect?
Absolutely.
Okay.
For us, what we're trying to think about is, so consumers still have the problem they can lose it or it can get stolen, right? That's not going to go away. What we're trying to do is we don't want to hold the risk of that. So if you look at our one business, we have a business where we track 80% of the mortgages in the U.S. and we're the insurer of last resort if there is no mortgage or no insurance protecting the mortgage. We're trying to offload all that risk. And so we've every year lowered the amount that we retain. We've gone to multi-year reinsurance partnerships. So I want to generate the risk because it's part of what the consumer ownership matters. We're not going to hold the risk ultimately. And so we'll be almost an agent, if you want to think about it that way, generating risk for other parties.
Hopefully not an agent that can be disrupted through the chain.
Everybody can be disrupted. So you just always have to keep reinventing what you're doing.
Of course. So to end this session, I'd love to play a game of overrated, underrated. So I'm going to say a term, and then Alan's going to say whether he believes it to be overrated or underrated. You ready?
Okay.
Let's start off with self-driving cars.
I think it's both. Today it's probably overrated. People, like how near it is. I don't think it's actually that near. I think underrated. People have no idea how disruptive it's going to be. For example, the number one employment for white males in the U.S. is driving. You think about the millions of workers who are going to lose their job. Ultimately, how do we as a society deal with it? So I think long term it's underrated.
That makes sense. Lemonade.
I hate to comment on a competitor. I wish them luck in their IPO because then I can talk about my business should have that same valuation or higher for that piece of it. So I wish them well with their IPO.
That's great. AppleCare.
Apple's a very big partner of ours. So what I like about Apple is they have such consumer loyalty. And so we announced recently we're their embedded partner in the U.S. for loss theft embedded in AppleCare. In Japan, we've extended the warranty, so we're doing the mechanical breakdown after AppleCare. So I think, again, I'm not going to answer that one directly, but they're a great partner.
Great. And next term will be Uber.
Well, I think the whole model, so Uber I think has long-term challenges. I'd probably say it's overrated. If you think about that model of independent employees, autonomous will completely disrupt that model. So they have to figure out, if I was running Uber, what's going to be, I've got this platform, where does it go when autonomous disrupts my value? Am I going to be the largest autonomous operator?
And then for our final one, let's go with the term car subscription service.
Yeah, I think it's probably overrated. We've not seen a lot of consumer real desire for it. What consumers have valued more is the convenience of, I just want a car today and it makes it easy for me, as opposed to people have not been as willing to sign up for long-term subscription. You know, if you think about Fair's model, it's more of a short-term subscription. That's where consumers have been more interested.
Okay. Great. Well, I want to say give a round of applause for Alan and his insights on where Assurant in the future is going. And for our next